Hi, we're back in the shed. We're back in the shed.
Tales from the Shed.
Tales from the shed. And what we're going to talk about rage today
Okay.
because I saw something, passing on my feed, things like that. And they were referring to it in terms of like menopausal rage and actually saying,
Okay.
and I was kind of actually, so I guess it's that, starting point is at that point in your life, whenever you come into menopause and whatever's kind of going on. But one of the things that women can experience is just rage that seems to kind of come out of nowhere, and it's just intense. And so it was this, and then they were talking about, what can you do? How do you notice it? Some ways that you can kind of check what is it you're really angry about, all those kind of things, like, maybe there's meditation, maybe there's exercise, maybe there's all sorts of other things you can do to kind of channel that. So there was some very helpful suggestions about what you can do about it. And it kind of got me thinking about rage in terms of it's quite a strong word.
It's a really strong word, and it's a very strong. It's a very, very strong emotion, but it's also it has far-reaching. I mean, once you're enraged, it's one of the fastest poisons that runs through, because you're enraged, people are defensive, people hate. Hate is another hugely strong word.
Yeah.
And then people become entrenched.
Yeah.
And then when they're entrenched in their position, they're not open to something.
Yeah. But it kind of reminded me of that whole thing that when we talk about how estrogen is lady forgiveness, the lady of forgiveness has left the building, when you've been through menopause and things like that. And you can get angry at things that people are doing that before you might have just put up with, or just kind of said, it's okay. They're young, they're this, that, whatever, they're doing it that way, I'll just take care of it, it's not worth getting upset about. But and is that the thing about hormonal rage or menopausal rage, is that suddenly women are enraged by things that maybe they should have been angry about before? I don't know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's two things. There's definitely the overcompensatory lady forgiveness.
I've been just putting up with everything, and now you're just having 40 years of.
And then there's a hormonal rage that is nothing to do with that, where you are bubbling with hormones that are out of sync and being told, calm down, dear.
Calm down, dear.
Do a bit of meditation. Calm down.
Go for
Stop thinking. Go for a run. Burn off your energy. Be grateful that you're not in Ukraine, which I am, and things like that. And it doesn't help, because it's a bit like, I don't know, somebody holding your hand in a fire, going, "Is that burning? Have you tried breathing hard? Have you tried thinking of something else? Have you thought about distraction?" When you have a hormonal rage, it is a physical thing happening to you. You are not responsible.
You're not in charge of it.
And so I think there's two really distinctive things that are trying to be collected together and ignoring what can be done. Because I think hormonal rage needs proper balance. Like if you're holding your hand in the fire and it's making you rough, you take your hand out of the fire, then you think about it. So I think if your hormones are out, I really hate it's your age. I hate that it's your menopause or it's all that. It's, you really have got a thing that's out. When your hormones aren't being absorbed properly, they run like poison around the body. So I always liken it to, because people say you should control it. And I say, if you drink a bottle of whiskey, and then I say, have a very positive mindset, meditate, think clearly, now drive the car safely. Or walk the white line. Let's not go to a car. Walk the white line and don't fall off it. When you have a poison in your system, which alcohol is, it changes your behavior. When you're not absorbing these very, very powerful hormones that make us women, hormones that make babies, hormones that give birth, big, strong, beautiful, beautiful hormones. When they are out of balance and they're not absorbed properly by the body, they then travel around the body and become poisonous giving real physical symptoms. It's like giving someone who doesn't like peanuts anaphylactic to peanuts and say, think carefully, I can eat them. I can eat those peanuts, they're not hurting me. It's probably because you think you're going to get an anaphylactic shock that you do. So I hate that wiping away. So it is a poison. It needs to be sorted with whatever works for you, whether that's supplements, whether it's whatever your holistic naturopathic place to go. And then when you get your hormones back in balance, you will just be you. And then that sort of rage,
and then you could say, you can deal with. Is it valid? What's going on? What am I really annoyed at? All that kind of stuff. But I think that's quite an interesting point. But it also made me think of, I went through the menopause, many years ago, 15 years at least. And I was kind of thinking, I'm not sure that I can remember the last time I was enraged. That I had that violent reaction, even if something was, negative, whatever, as I always say, if you meet somebody in the lanes and they won't reverse or any of those kind of different things.
I think it's you though. So you might be somebody who's angry at something. You might be somebody who's enraged and wants to take to the streets. So you might be somebody who prays for world peace. Whatever that is, it's your individual you. And I think it's but being enraged all the time is a very negative emotion.
Oh gosh, it just wears you out, doesn't it? And it is. But I was just wondering whether, as you go through that, if rage is the thing that kind of comes up for you and all the rest of it, is it something that as you go beyond that transition and you get into this? I mean, mind you, I have met quite a lot of angry old people. Get really, really upset about things. I was just thinking, I'm just hoping it was a kind of function of age, because I was thinking, even when I do meet somebody, and I might get a spike of annoyance, and then it's just like, oh, but you know what? I live in Devon all the time. You're only here on holiday.
And I can drive the lanes if I want, if I can.
Yeah, I know. So it kind of feels like, because I look at myself when I was younger, and I just remember, and people kind of say they might kind of experience me as quite a strong personality now, but I'm going, well, you should have seen me when I was 22, mate, because I was fierce and everything was upsetting. And I do remember that lots of things made me angry, and the way that I was, if I was treated, if I was discriminated against, if I had some kind of, it was when I did go through a period of when some people call me dear or love, and I had to point it out that was not appropriate, and I was not their dear or love and all the rest of it. And then I got to a point where I was like, oh, I can't be asked with this. And then so it's like, so there's a number of stages that we move through in those terms.
I think that's true. And I remember being angry, as you say, with so much. I was really, fighting for or being angry or taking offence and all the rest of it. And I think part of me just realised I was the one that was suffering here, and I was exhausted, and I was always full of, and I would go over and over and over things. And I think the more you change through, people do change through life. Hopefully you change through life, because that's a really positive thing. But I just realised, and as I read more about forgiveness, allowing people to follow their path. And I can remember I had a turning point. It was a long, long, long time ago where I read it. It was unfortunately a Christian book, but it was a very valid book. And she was talking about forgiveness. And she said it was her own sort of transition of learning how to do it. And she realised how many things she was angry at. She'd always been considered herself to be a very tolerant, middle-aged person, but realised she was angry at and made this list. She was somebody that made lists in the morning. And she said the list just got longer and longer and longer, and she got angrier and angrier. And then she went through each one individually. And she said, she put her little thing on a bit of paper and said, you may be as wrong can be, but I'll not be the judge. And then put it on the fire.
Striking.
And she just, in that moment, released them and said, I'm not your judge. And it really sparked. I think I was quite young. I was probably mid-20s or something. And it was something, no, actually, I think I was a teenager, because it was it was something I'd never come across. That idea of forgiveness in that way. Forgiveness was always very religious, which didn't sit well. But it was almost like, you can be as wrong could be. And she said the more she wrote them, the more was coming up. So she thought she'd get through them in a week. And by the end of the month, she had more was coming up. And what I can always remember, I must have been a teenager, probably only 13, 14. And she said, I suddenly realised I was very, very angry at Henry VIII. And she said she'd always been interested in history all her life. And she said it's a very famous part of history. And she said, it was like, how dare you treat those women? And she said, the more she thought about it, she wrote, she said, and the notebook were going, look, writing about Henry VIII, and she's going, you know, like it's going to make any difference. But she said she realised how much anger she was holding. And she said it was the hardest one out of all of them. And there was another one that she wrote that her husband had sadly died of lung cancer, and she was writing, it was in the 50s. And there was this little whisper that cigarettes may not be good for your lungs. So he'd given up cigarettes, and then he'd got ill. And the doctor that came around to see him said he's quite anxious. And she said the best thing to help anxiety is to give him a cigarette. So the doctor gave him a cigarette, and he got better. He was fine, but he took up, so he couldn't give up smoking again. Right, okay. And then about 3 or 4 years later, he was diagnosed with lung cancer and died. And she said that took nearly a week to say to the doctor, you may have been as wrong can be. You did what you did, and I'll not be your judge. And that's she said,
quite amazing.
And at the end of this time, she said, I have never felt so free. And she said, I almost had limitless time and energy in my life to enjoy things, because she didn't realize how much of that was cluttering up her life. And I was so young, and as I said, never read anything like it. You know, your very first book like that just like blows your mind. I don't know if it would now, but it did then. And I've always held her in my heart of like, you may be as wrong can be, but while I'm your judge, I'm in that space.
Crikey. Well, that's quite amazing to me, because obviously we've just been through a period of like 3 or 4 years or whatever it was, of this whole, well, actually more than that, really, since Brexit, where I kind of feel people are angry at other people for not voting the way that they voted, whichever way that was. And then we had the pandemic, and then it was like, so there was a system of behaviour, and then you could be angry at somebody else for not behaving the way that you thought was right. So that's kind of multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. And to be quite honest, I'm just angry at the government because they're, you know, for the last 12 years, you know, but I'm thinking that's really quite interesting, isn't it? Could I actually do that? Could I say to Rishi, you can be as wrong can be, but who am I to judge?
I'll not be your judge.
I'll not be your judge.
And that to me is because your Rishi Sunak was her Henry VIII or that doctor. These are people.
I'm not that pleased with Henry VIII either. I think he was a bit of a shit.
But I think she didn't think he was a bit of a shit. She's
really angry.
But it's like, I'll not be your judge. And then, and so myself that was so rageful at so much for so many different reasons. She's always been with me, that woman that wrote that book. And she's always been with me. And recently, we've just got into a thing with a house, and we've got a greedy person that just goes up to sweeping that off, and it's been a bit And for 3 days, I was raging against this person that's done a really snake-like
they
thing.
really ditch you.
And I knew from day one, I knew I had to forgive, but I wasn't going to bother that day. I wanted to hold the anger for one day, because it was just like making me feel hungry. It was like, that's what Alison should pull you. And it was just like this lovely self-indulgent anger. And then on day 2, I thought, this is not doing me any good. And then on day 3, I was able to go, you as wrong can be, I'll not be your judge. And that meant that what happened was everything seemed to shift away, and they've all got involved in this fighting, and they're all going to lose. And I'm over here doing something different. And so whilst I get the rage and people feel justifiably angry, there's ways of doing things that don't involve rage.
Yeah, I know. I think that's really fascinating. And I think, and that's it's that whole thing of the difference between that, you know, responsibility and blame, And rage often is a blaming thing, because you're angry at the other person because they have not done the right thing. They have not done it the way that you would do it.
The right thing, or the way you would do it.
Well, because for most of us, those two things are the same.
Yeah, but that's only when you're sitting from your own perspective.
Yeah.
So just allowing, it's like saying the right colour to paint a room is yellow. And if everybody would just have that one thing.
Yeah.
But the fact is, we do need people with all sorts of different things. It's like when we go and see a theatre show, you've got the protagonist, or you write a book, you've got the goodies and the baddies and the protagonist and whatever it is that goes on. If everybody was goody two shoes and we were just watching a Quaker meeting, it wouldn't be so good. So we kind of need these different things, but it's how we steer ourselves through that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a brilliant thought to have. You can be as wrong could be,
but I'll not be your judge.
That's going to be very important going into the Christmas period, isn't it, really? Especially if you're seeing your family.
Good luck with
that.